5 for effect. Red 5 out.
Target Citadel 1, over.
Target Citadel 1, out.
Danger close, at my command, over.
Danger close at my command, out.
Send it.
Hello world. Taken me a while to get to this point, but I just want to start off by saying hello. A lot of you who know me personally from past lives, I've kind of gone dormant for a while. Really needed to look inside, figure out the path that I wanted to engage in, and a lot of what I'm about to explain kind of explains where I've been for the last few years, but doesn't excuse the absence. So I look forward to reconnecting with a lot of people that I've lost touch with as I've gone on the journey that has been my life over the last 10 to 15 years, 5 to 15 years. I am launching this week. This week is going to be the launch on Wednesday. We're going to be launching my Mindcraft remote viewing dojo, which is a product of the last, my life's work leading up to this point, and everything saying that something important is down this path for me, and it has been incredibly gratifying, challenging, but getting to where I am, to the point where I'm confident enough to go out into the world and say, hey, I'm willing to teach something like remote viewing, when there are people like Dr. Greer out there who are saying remote viewers are targeted by a small section of a legal, compartmentalized part of a breakaway civilization that is harvesting psychic people across the globe in order to use them for their communications array to remote view across vast distances in interdimensional, transdimensional space.
But there's a CIA black site 160 not far from Nashville that was involved in some of these operations, mostly drugs and drug running, but also trafficking.
So it's a human trafficking operation. It's part of Stargate.
Yeah, but you have to understand what it's for. It's not for, shits and giggles, excuse me. It's rather, I have to say, some of these projects, they're very disturbing. And I don't know how much people want to hear this, but
they want to hear it.
It will keep you awake at night. If you have children like I do. But they're used in very specific operations, and they're selected for certain capabilities, particularly psi capabilities. Okay. And those are used in projects that these illegal projects are running for the purpose of communication.
So what's coming to my mind right now is remote viewing.
Yes.
Is that involved in this?
But in a very high-tech way, technologically. Most of the subjects die as a consequence of what they're made to do. But they have certain aptitudes and abilities for which they are screened, and then they are abducted and taken. Now, keep in mind, this is also, there are a lot of operations that are related to this.
So there is a lot to be cognizant of and to take seriously, and I'm going to. And we'll get into how we're going to anonymize the remote viewing dojo, so none of this stuff is anything that impacts our ability to grow as a dojo. Let's get back into the fun parts. Just the main thing for the Mindcraft part of the remote viewing dojo is that we're going to start accessing our operating systems as a third-person viewer, looking at our operating systems and objectifying it, and then personifying certain archetypes that we've built, looking into energy management as the new time management, and understanding that time is a construct. It's one of the many constructs that we subscribe to as people that get us from point A to point B, or get us from institutional point A to point B, and understanding how our energy on a day-to-day basis interacts with the other energies that are coming at us based on mandates and based on government overreach and based on cultural, psychological operations being run on the global population. Sounds a little conspiracy theory. We might go there, but every day that goes on, more and more quote-unquote conspiracies are proven to be true. I also think it's interesting that a three-letter organization was the one who started the term conspiracy theory so that they can just tag anybody who has neurodivergent thinking around institutionalization, be classified as this kooky, tin-foil hat wearing, bunker dweller, right? It's all the negative things that they don't want you to actually become, because then you have independence in your thought processes, and you have your independence in your value that you bring to your family. So could you survive 3 days without an institution telling you, helping you, are you independent? So that's what really Minecraft remote viewing is. Giving a little background information about how I got into it. Really, just since I was young, there were always weird things happening around me. I've always had this weird effect on electronics. They don't work right. Radios and CD players and cars growing up would just short out, or you get error codes for things that make no sense. And so just realizing now, some of that is my auric field and some of that is the field of other things interacting with me. But as a kid, I had twice a reoccurring dream, and knowing that that's when my consciousness was being formed, and that was when my memory centers were starting to be formed. You don't remember a lot of things as a kid, but the things that stick out, that leave an impact, probably should be looked into at a deeper level and unpacked, figured out what they were there for, what the lesson was, and then you can reframe what happened to you to benefit you moving forward. So twice a week, for at least a week straight, at 4 years old and 7 years old, I was having these recurring dreams, and it was a nightmare. It was bad. I'll just say that there was a group of kids that were locked somewhere, and it was a bad dream. And there's no reason why my 4-year-old brain should be having this dream, especially reoccurring time over time. So looking at that, that's like, all right, so what happened? What was the thing that happened to me that caused the recurring dream? The things that I would have never thought up as a 4-year-old happened in the dream, trying to unpack that. And I'd like to, offer up that, individual coaching that I offer, that's the type of thing that we work on individually, the very deep, very personal, some of the traumas that, why was I having this dream? What is the thing that needs to be unpacked there energetically? Also being raised, going to Methodist church, I was a kid who I would fake going, okay, bye mom and dad, you guys go to the sanctuary, I'll go downstairs by myself, you don't need to check me into Sunday school. And me and one of my friends would, because our church was surrounded by a giant park, we would either go play in the park or, hang out somewhere in the church where we couldn't be found, instead of sitting there and doing what our parents thought we were doing. A little bit of that was rebelling, but a little bit of it was also starting to see that it felt pretty culty. It felt pretty indoctrination. You'd ask a question, they'd have, it felt culty to me at the time, and I was resistant to it. I had yet to go to a Catholic service to understand what real religion cultiness felt like at the time. But to anybody who's been an observer new into a Catholic service and you don't know what you're getting into, I've been to many at this point in my life. When do we stand up? When do we kneel? Why is everybody saying the same things at the exact same time? This feels weird. This is institutionalization through religion. Nowadays, definitely the lessons from a Jesus figure, the lessons. I believe that I'm a follower of the Gnostic version of Christianity, the original version of Christianity, the first version of Christianity, before the popes and the kings of the world decided to use the religion as something that they could, use. And that Gnostic version of Christianity is more of what did the man say, what did the man do, and how did he live his life, rather than setting up some institution to teach people the 10 Commandments and say, probably a bad idea if you steal and kill and lust all day, probably not good. Which really speaks to like the basic nature of where we have graduated out of, 1800s into a little bit more of a open-minded thinking about religion. So that led to, my dad was in leadership of the Methodist church that we were a part of, and he got a background view of what actual church leadership and strategy looked like. Almost said strategery. And really thought it was gross. It started to look like the main minister was building a shrine to himself. That's what we started calling it, the shrine to. And it got a little gross. And so we, as a family and a small group inside of this church, decided to create our own group. The church that we were part of let us use their chapel and some of their rooms to meet in, because most of our group was still attending services on Sunday. But we created a group, my dad created a group called Quantum Faith. And we started reading books like, the first batch of books that I really remember were like The Secret or Eckhart Tolle, Be Here Now, or The Power of Now. And really understanding like, all right, there is the law of attraction, there's a thing to that. What The Secret presents is totally commercial and fake and bogus and not real. But there is a little bit of truth into there. And Eckhart Tolle, hard to listen to. I like listening to audiobooks, and he reads his audiobooks, and he has a very monotonous tone. I remember driving between Los Angeles and Colorado, listening to him and starting to go, oh no, I'm gonna fall asleep. And I really wanted to listen to hours of him at the same time. But so that's my experience with Eckhart Tolle. Great stuff. But we went on to learn more about near-death experiences, quantum entanglement, really getting into quantum physics, and ultimately, practicing tools like past life regressions or reveries, and also doing things like Dr. Joe Dispenza teaches, meditation practices that can actually release any blockages that you have in your body. And that's what happened to me. I remember doing one of Dr. Joe Dispenza's meditation practices where you clinch. So you meditate, you get to meditative state, you get your brain waves through the delta doorway. We'll get to some of this training in a little bit. But you compress different energy centers in your body, starting at your base all the way up to the top. And one of the times I did that, I could feel it. It felt like a laser beam going out of the top of my head. And I remember just thinking, that's a whole new experience. And I'm going to do everything I can to, if I'm going to point my energy towards learning something new, it's going to be, expert tier 1 level meditation. What can you do meditating? What can't you do meditating is what I wanted to learn. Like, here's an opportunity to really meditate deeply and, understand more about yourself, understand more about your own energy centers, understand more about how you interact with the world. And so, quantum faith has been a part of my life for 15 or so, maybe 20 years, almost 2 decades. And just having that regular recurring loop back into a non-traditional thinking loop, the institutions that, say, here is our history. oh, and by the way, we are Empire and we wrote the history books. So this is history. And you get taught exactly what history is. And I'm a poli-sci major, deep study of politics and the psychological operations run just to get people elected versus, or let alone to maintain an agenda or a narrative based on national security state, and eminent domain claims on anything that might disrupt the commercial success of the economy. Went down a tangent there. Let's get back to the reason for the Minecraft Dojo, remote viewing dojo. So as I'm beginning to get into corporate leadership, it's working as a sales rep, I go through one of the hardest times of my life. About 10 years ago, I go through 10-year cycles of rebirth. And 10 years ago, I was almost engaged and found out that was not a good option. Had a dog who was 7 years old and started having seizures and had encephalopathy and needed to be put down. Got a DUI, full disclosure, right? Like I was struggling to figure it out, and I wasn't running a successful program, and was really looking to see what other philosophies out there that I might be able to learn from and absorb and might lead me in a successful direction other than the sales rep, sales leadership, work hard, party hardier, influence, and your reputation is everything. And I'm not saying that's not true. I'm just saying it doesn't need to be everything. So around that time in my life, really struggling. So leading up to this point, having done some genealogical research, figuring out, my place. I'm a 6th generation Coloradan, so my family's been here since the 1800s. That's the narrative. That's it. And really diving into my genealogy, finding out that my mom's side of the family came over on the Mayflower through John Alden and Priscilla Mullins. My dad's side of the family came over on the Mayflower, and I don't have the image right here, but it was from the Howland Tilley side. And so that means that my mom's side came over as a cooper. It was a cooper, a barrel maker for the boat, according to the narrative. I think it's interesting that the Alden crest has a moon in it, which would be a symbol of potentially being, militant, colonialist conquerors, and that would be on the John Alden side. They were basically essentially the royalty, and then on the Tilley Howland side, I think John Tilley was the manservant to the governor of the boat. So came over being servants on my dad's side of the family and essentially colonial royalty on my mom's side of the family. And really digging into what did Virginia and Massachusetts look like when we first landed here as a family, and what has happened since. Understanding that, my dad's side of the family, for the most part, they were Quakers. They were pushed out of Boston. They owned part of Nantucket Island, were pushed out for having, spiritual beliefs that didn't support the Crown's psychological operation. And so they all got pushed, and having followed my family lines, they all got pushed along the same line of the Trail of Tears, which is interesting. I hadn't really thought that maybe there might be some Quakers that were shoved out of the East Coast and forced to go into Oklahoma territories. I mean, my grandpa was born in Independence, Kansas, moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and for the longest time couldn't figure out the story, the genealogy of how that happened. How do you go from, Indiana and Ohio to Kansas to Tulsa, Oklahoma? And then also, unfortunately, I wish I hadn't, but I did the 23andMe genetic algorithm and de-anonymized myself and my family. I'm going to apologize apologize for doing that, but can't undo it. And when I got the results back, it was really interesting because there were trace amounts of Native American history or Native American genetics in my blood. And really started to dive into what does that mean? It was probably, down the Trail of Tears, probably either following, I want to believe that we were following people we cared about, and that the narrative around the Trail of Tears is the same as the narrative around the Kunta Kinte out of Africa theory for slavery, when in reality there was a whole civilization living on this continent that has been dominated, and I don't want to get into that here. This is just an intro video, but there's plenty more where that came from. So anyways, having all of this, one of my favorite movies growing up was National Treasure, and finding out or understanding that my great-grandfather on my dad's side was the worshipful master of the George Washington Lodge in Denver, Colorado, and having this illusion built up in my head of what Freemasonry is. And then also, having someone important in my life, my sister's husband's dad was an active member in Freemasonry, and he was the quintessential Blue Lodge white hat, doing good, genuinely cared, genuinely doing good in the world, and it really intrigued me. I was like, man, you have a really good set of morals and ethics, and where did that come from? And it was Freemasonry. And so he signed as my first line signer, and I petitioned a lodge, went through the whole interview process, and joined was asked to go through the initiation process in 2014. Thought it was really cool. I never joined a fraternity in college, but I always had friends, like my freshman year roommate. He was his senior year was the president of his frat, and so I was always going to these events but never actually went through the initiation process, was never considered a brother, just a friend, somebody who was hung around, made authentic friendships and didn't have to pay for my friends. But that said, joined the Blue Lodge of Freemasons in 2014, and I did the hard work of the degree progression. I don't want to get into the specifics of what the degree progression is. It's all out there. You can look it up online. But, I did the learning, the deep learning, and there's no script for the memorization part that you do. You have to hear it, word of mouth, and recite it. And I did that for 2 years to get to my third degree, to become raised as a third degree Mason. At the same time, I'm watching other lodges and places and understanding how initiation works, and understanding that there are people that they joke about and call McMasons. The overnight Mason, the one who didn't do the learning but has enough value that if you bring them into the organization, their value trumps the need to have them go through the eye-opening experience of actual deep learning in a way that hasn't been taught for, we'll say, centuries, but that's a narrative term also. Spoken word, stories, memorization, recitation in a public environment, and it's deep learning, and understanding that someone like who joined the organization but never did the actual work to be raised through the degrees, just did a weekend retreat and did it. That bothered me, that there's this like, oh, if you have enough money and we see enough value to the organization, we'll bring you into it. And that was when it was starting to be like, yeah, there are levels here, and there are people. The Blue Lodge is awesome. I would say I didn't have a single bad experience in the Blue Lodge. But over the next 8 or 9 months, well, let's say 3 years after completing my third degree, it became all about next steps. It became all about the next degrees. And I personally, I didn't see the value out of the first 3 degrees. The social part of it, it seemed like it was, let's get together every other Wednesday. There was no value. I didn't see value in the philanthropy side of it. It seemed like the philanthropy side of the Blue Lodge I was a part of was, let's collect money and give out money. But the actions that we were doing were for the widows of past Masons. They weren't for the general public. They were for inside of the Brotherhood. And that's when I was like, okay. Was always told that I can leave and come back. If it's not the right time for me to be here, it's not the right time for me to be here. And I can always, if it's the right thing to come back, you can come back. And so I left participation in the Blue Lodge after 2 years. I was a participant from 2014 to 2016. And yeah, I didn't want to go through how do I say this? Yeah, let's just leave that there. I started to understand the nature of institutions, organizations there will always be the sociopaths. There will always be the power mongers. Inside of any organization, inside of a police force, inside of your Baskin-Robbins work staff, there will always be somebody trying to climb the ladder and manipulate and work their way up. And so understanding Blue Lodge Masonry, the first 3 degrees, it's not evil. It is not evil at all from my perspective. But once you're there at the 3rd degree, that's where the black hat, white hat, are you a sociopath? Are you a psychopath? Are you willing to do certain things? Are you willing? I am a human with my own agency, and I recognize authority when it is deserved and not when it's dictated. And I don't want to give up my own personal authority for any type of organization that isn't benevolent first. So that's part of the reason for the Remote Viewing Dojo is, I want people to sign up with an anonymous email, use a random name and number generator to generate their inside the dojo call sign, train people to use VPNs and remote access, run off of donations because donations will keep this alive. If I try to monetize the Remote Viewing Dojo as a subscription, then people are giving me their personal information, go on a list inside of the platform. It should be all password protected and all that. But I don't want to give any of these sociopathic institutions a list to go harvest people who are developing their psychic abilities. So when you sign up for the Remote Viewing Dojo, I will ask that you anonymize, that you go to Proton Mail, get a new email address, go to a random name, random number generator, create a name and number to be your call sign. So I did it the other day and I was Tiberius 32. I was like, all right, that'll work. And create call signs for people. I don't mind being public. Fear is the mind killer. Death is the number one fear. I'm not afraid of leading a Remote Viewing Dojo publicly. And a lot of that comes from the corporate schism that I went through. I was a sales manager for 4 years. I've been in sales, corporate sales, since graduating college. Thought I wanted to go be a lawyer and be a politician until I worked for a politician and understood what the truth of what that loop looks like to your daily life and the people around you, and how much privacy you do or don't have, and how much agenda towing of the party that you have to do in order to even be considered a candidate in today's political system. So big hope is we have a third party, no party kind of thing, no brand, no names, no party. But, I went through a time when I got meningitis because I was working too hard, burning the candle at both ends, and needed to step back. It was a forced reset from God saying, buddy, you are going to kill yourself for an institution, a sociopathic, shareholder value driven, not public benefit value driven organization. And you just gave yourself meningitis and rhabdomyolysis and had a near-death experience because you overdosed on creatine. And after going through that near-death experience, we'll get into more of that later, but having the choice, you can go this way, or you can go back to your body and really go back into the world and start to understand and figure some stuff out. That set me down a path of looking at the corporate world I was in, and it becoming more and more led by sociopathic tendencies of KPI management and passive slavery and lead measures versus lag measures, and really just any data that we can feed the AI to help make us more productive, because we need to increase shareholder value and not public benefit. And I watched this corporation go from, having no crazy fees, termination fees, to all of a sudden there's cancellation and transfer fees and asset-based fees and all these little fees, and not telling clients that they were coming. And it was just a really toxic situation, realizing that the black hats were taking over the corporation that I had been a part of for 6 years. It made the last 2 years of being in that corporate world unbearable, to the point that, short-term disability, migraines, and had to leave because my health wasn't keeping up with the demands of a sociopathic organization. And it's the leaders of the organization. You can't blame an organization for being sociopathic. It's the people who allow those behaviors to continue. So if you've ever said, oh, I only did it because I was told to, I would point you in the direction of the Nuremberg trials, when certain head decision makers and tried to use that excuse for what happened during the Holocaust. It's running rampant in our world today. Leadership through sociopathy and borderline psychopathy. So I had the chance through that to really heal and contemplate and understand the reality of what was going on around me. The reality of is this corporate loop something that will be around forever? No. Is our economy something that is based in reality, or is it a debt fiat economy that is naturally entropic, which means it's designed to fail? And is the peak of narcissism believing that thing can't crash in your lifetime? We know it's designed to fail. We know it's based on debt. And believing that thing can't fail in your lifetime, it was it's time to get out of the corporate world. You really need to understand the nature of the universe. You need to build your value, your skill set, your reputation, your access, and your ability to influence your mental and your physical applications throughout the world. After the near-death experience, the corporate schism, it was the first time in 15 years I was out of that loop. I wasn't looking at monthly quotas for the first time in 15 years. I wasn't looking for, how do I gamify for my team a fun and enjoyable experience, but also the most successful sales year that this industry has ever seen, right? You're out there trying to dominate and conquer, and the people that you are competing against are the other sales reps from the other companies, and they're the evil ones, and here's what they're doing. And it's really like, is this healthy? Is this a healthy thing to do to yourself for 15 years straight? So I was out of that loop, and also running the occult knowledge, deep research. You get initiated into the Freemasons. You learn some stuff that you didn't understand before you're initiated into that organization, and it leads you down different paths. Read a lot of Manly P. Hall, read a lot of the esoteric works from the 1800s, the original, white hat Freemason teaching, and just really began to understand the institutionalization that was happening around me, the agenda and narrative control of something like the space god, the screen gods, the woke gods. It's all cult indoctrination. It's all micro cults being set up to feed the narrative, to keep people passive and docile, instead of going out and really understanding the energetic impact that they can have on the world. And the thing that is magic is manifestation. It's the generative principle. So like to teach and understand really what the generative principle is. How does something go from a thought to an emotion to a belief, then is passed through your reticular activating system for you to look for either confirmation or denial of that belief, and really playing with the fact that you're looking for confirmation of the things that you want to manifest, and then turning that into the generative principle of thought becomes something in the material world. Everything we see around us was a thought first. Everything you do while you're remote viewing is observing thought. The thought energy of the things, the thought energy of the timeline, the thought energy of the trauma, the thought energy, the thought energy, the thought energy. Everything is energy, including your thoughts. Everything. So I am launching a remote viewing dojo to teach my modality and to also invite other people to teach their modalities for accessing the through line or the delta doorway or whatever your modality teaches for the access point from the material world, from this, your alpha brainwave state, your awake state, your conscious state, to all of the other things that are happening energetically in your life around you that may just be part of your subconscious. You may think it's a system that you have no control over. It's just happening. It's just happening. And a lot of people, the most successful people, get into a place where they understand it's going to happen, and you have the power and the ability to build that thing that is going to be manifest, whether it's your emotional toolkit, whether it's your operating system on a daily basis, whether it's your emergency activation system. What happens when you get into acute trauma and you need to react immediately? How do we safely build psychological steps for people to go up to realize, hey, maybe if I rely on McDonald's to feed me 5 days a week and McDonald's goes away because everything that has a beginning has an end, these institutions, these people, maybe they start feeding you crickets and saying, it's time, we're going crickets. We can't sustain the cows because of their methane or whatever narrative they're pushing right now. But really getting into a place of how do you build value and how do you build skills? How do you build your reputation and access, your self-reputation? What is self-reputation? And how do you build that over time? What does your tribe or your family look like from a value? Do you have storerooms? We used to have so many storerooms. Every building had a storeroom, every apartment a storeroom, and they would store value in that room. They'd store grains. We don't do that anymore at a local level. We have outsourced everything and institutionalized to centralization. And without getting into too much of the program, really, it's the stores of value and skills, the access and reputation you have, and then your ability to turn that into mental energy that can be turned into physical energy that can then manifest what you want in the world. and remote viewing your timeline, remote viewing the things that have led to the person that you are, and your potential timelines looking forward. It's the cone of uncertainty that we're looking at in front of us. It's this giant cone of all of the potential timelines that you're manifesting. There's all this potential, all of these decisions that you could be making in this moment that might lead you down a certain path. Well, let's look at what you're currently manifesting, what path your trajectory is currently on, and let's make some decisions about the path that you want to be on and the steps that you can take at a mental, a physical, a value, a skill set, an access, and a reputation level. Manifest that new timeline. So you collapse probabilities, and that's what I call the free will game. So you have a game. You can learn about your past. You can learn about all these things that made you who you are today. You can unpack them, reframe them, pack them back up, put them to use, and you can look forward at all of the potential timelines. What is your current trajectory? Where are you headed? Where you want to head? So I look forward to working with anybody that this resonates with. I want to keep the dojo free, based on, the success of this will be based on donations. I don't like the word mastermind, but like a high level group experience with the black belts of the dojo. We might call them the Orion belts instead of black belts. Interesting. But they will eventually be doing high level remote views for contract. We will go out and contract, and we will do remote views based on what a public survey. Hey, we want you to look into this. Hey, we want you to look into the results of the Super Bowl for 2024. Maybe we'll do a remote view into the results of the Super Bowl, publish the results, and compare what we see to what actually happens, that type of thing. So the public facing side of it, and then also, partnering with people like the Disclosure Project to be able to be a resource for anybody who wants to come out and disclose some of these known psychological practices and techniques and technologies, how they work. There's a big push right now for disclosure in the corporate space. There's a law being passed saying you have X amount of time to disclose this stuff, or else we're going to pursue you criminally and potentially pursue you in other ways. I know that there's tactical teams stood up to assault some of these bunkers where some of this stuff is being held. That is a non sequitur. We're not going down that path yet. So anyways, the way to sign up: on Wednesday, we will be launching the dojo in our platform. You'll have access to the basics section, the introductory section, the target matrix. So it's a grid of 10 by 10 with numbers and letters, and we will remote view what is in each one of those grids. It's a game. Every week we'll do 3 of the 100, and then at the end, once we reach the 100th, that is the last 4 are tandem jumps. They're remote views that we have to do as a group. All the other 96 are easy for you to learn your modality, but these other 4, they have psychic barriers on them. They're physical locations that have teams of psychics that their whole role is to prevent remote viewers from seeing into the place. So I wouldn't recommend doing those without a monitor if you're the viewer, or as a group. You do a group meditation. We can group view this. We can compare results to what we're looking at. And then I'll tell everybody what it is, what it was. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I do. I think it'll be a blast. So you'll have access to the introductory area, the target matrix, and then week 1 of training. And then every week, up to a certain number of weeks, there will be new training. All designed to get through level 1 remote viewer, level 2 remote viewer, level 3 remote viewer. So it's sequential. You learn more along the way. At the same time, you're learning how to be a level 1 monitor And I think that's the thing that's being skipped by a lot of, just meditate, learn how to astral project in remote view. And it really helps to learn it that way, learn what your modality is and how you get into the Delta doorway, you access the through line, you get to remote viewing. So you will go through level 1 for being a monitor. Monitor is the other side of the viewer. It's somebody who is with either digitally, but their consciousness are connected somehow. And that person is the safety tether back to that person's body as that consciousness is leaving in remote viewing. So learning how to hold a safe space, that's what the monitor does. And learning how to go out and be a tactical intelligence gatherer, that's what the viewer does. So safe space, tactical. Learn that together. And then eventually by level 3, you learn how to be your own monitor and your own viewer at the same time. And you go out with the skill set of being a tactical medic, right? You run into a psychic barrier, you have the skills to make sure that your connection is back to the through line healthily and you aren't doing anything out there to your consciousness that can't be, that is unhealthy. Then we get, if you make it through tier 3 or level 3, that's when tier 1 starts. You become part of the tier 1 teams that we're building with all of these psychic operators that are doing remote views for white hat benevolent purposes. Really looking forward to working with as many of you that this resonates with. I know that this is going to sound crazy to a lot of you who know me from my past life. I mean, I was pretty chill, calm sales guy, never really got rattled unless it was, personal attack. And now I teach Mindcraft and remote viewing. Join me on Wednesday when we launch. This is going to be a good time.